without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring in Cory. Hope you're well, my friend, and welcome in.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to hear your voice, man. I mean, there's just a lot of crap going on,
Yeah, yeah, a lot of crap. I guess you could say that.
huh?
But
Yeah.
I'm pretty harsh on JFK news when it comes out, because 99% of it is like meaningless, you know. Um, the Joannides stuff is interesting with the alias, but we've known that Joannides was in New Orleans summer '63. I've never been able to connect him to anybody, obviously because of the name, but I never knew what he was doing down there. I don't even know if the CIA had an actual station down there like they did in Miami. JM Wave was the biggest CIA station that had like 30,000 agents attached to it or something absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really interesting just to see I mean, from a mainstream perspective, it's just interesting to see guys like Gerald Posner and his posse, coming out with guns blazing towards, people that actually believe that there are more than one shooter and like, just, questioning the narrative of the lone gunman theory and can't wait to hear your take on that, Corey. But
well,
yeah, it's
well,
just,
let me say this about Gerald Posner. So he wrote one of his first books was a book on the Holocaust, and he interviewed the children of like the SS, right? Who had been like secreted away and hidden and protected and all that stuff. And nobody had these people's information at all. It was ultra top secret. But then he gets the information and goes interviews these people to write a book. Okay, that tells me everything I need to know about the guy. Where did he get
hmm
that information from? The
yeah.
only people that would have had it. So, and then
Well,
anybody
not
on the
only
lone
that,
gunman tip still like people who are lone gunman proponents. They just I don't they're ultimate failures because they don't. The information is out there that proves that it was not a lone gunman, right? At a very minimum, and they just ignore it all. They ignore it all.
well,
So
yeah. I mean, all you have to do is just watch the Zapruder tape. I mean, again, you see that final shot, and there you go. I mean, you can't. I mean, for me, I mean that kind of puts the clincher on it. Like I look at the Zapruder tape and I see his head getting blown off. And forgive me for
mhm.
seeing that in such a graphic way, but good lord, I mean, it's just yeah, it was obviously a shot that came from an angle near the front, like near the Knoll area or wherever it was, coordinated to be. But anyways,
So Doug Horn, when he talked to the new HSCA or whatever they're calling it, I don't even know if it has a name. Doug Horn said that there was evidence of 3 shots to the head. I really don't know. I'd like to understand what he's talking about because as far as shots from the front, I have I've calculated as a throat shot and as a headshot, and that's it from the front. Now, could there have been a simultaneous from the rear? Sure. Um, Now, another one on top of those two, I don't know. That just seems a little bit. I couldn't place a shooter to make that other shot for sure. So,
well, my perspective is that back shot that they found that was lodged still in his back, barely going in.
right.
That came in from the book depository building.
I doubt that.
Um,
I doubt that. I would say that that probably came from the Daltex. The um, when you look at how the vehicles on that angle lined up to the stoop underneath the fire escape, it's like a perfect line. That the shot that if there was a shot that went through the windshield, I would say it came from there also. The shot that hit the curb with James Tague, that definitely came from the Daltex. Um, they all come from that same single line of shots. So I'm not sure. I know that. So you have 2 shooters in the book depository and one on the roof. Now, we know there's one on the roof because they found a Mauser up there, and then the Dallas police actually said that a security guard dropped it. So they confirmed that there was a Mauser found on the roof. The 2 shooters that I put inside the book depository are Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall. Uh, you have to understand the full backstory of these guys to understand their involvement in the setup of Oswald and the relationships with New Orleans going back to '61, right? So these guys are major players in the story of the setup going forward. It was Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, and William Seymour at Sylvia Odio's. And we know this because Lauren Hall admitted it, right? We have a document where he
yeah,
admitted it
yeah.
in an FBI interview. But then a couple days later, he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I remember now. It wasn't them. I don't know who it was." Right? So um, once you understand their involvement, and then you kind of connect the dots through like the Thomas Beckham stuff, where Thomas Beckham actually delivered a package to him at the Executive Inn with money. I mean, it becomes pretty obvious what was going on. And then when you get into the Jules Rico Kimball stuff, he names Howard and Hall and these guys. He calls them a bunch of crumbs, and he's the one who basically told Garrison that Howard and Seymour took the shot at Walker, right? Which makes perfect sense. I don't know that they used that Carcano for that, because I think the bullet was never identified, or it was identified as something else. But they would have had access to the Carcano because ultimately it was planted up in the book depository. So, but then you have the statements of Arnold Rowland. He sees the guy up in the window, and he described him as a Cuban or a Latino, and he was dark complected, and his he didn't know if he was wrinkled or scarred, but he said his face was marked in some kind of way. That's only one suspect. That's Lawrence Howard. Lawrence Howard had a pockmarked face, and he had moles on his face. He was a really rough-looking guy. Cuban, dark complected. Actually, he wasn't Cuban. He was a Mexican, half Irish, born in Los Angeles, I believe. So, but yeah.
For you listeners out there, I'm going to go ahead and share, if that's okay with you, Cory. I'm going to share the picture of him, if that's okay, so people get an idea. I'll do that here later on in the discussion. But Tim, I see you hopped on again. Thanks for having me on your show last night. Do you have a question for Cory or some input for us tonight?
Sure. Yeah. Why would a security guard be carrying a German Mauser?
Right. Yeah. Good question.
And then what do you think about the doctor's reports that showed a gaping wound in the back of Kennedy's head, and then later recanted that, and then came back with it later again?
Well, yeah, that corresponds with the Harper fragment. So I think it's pretty clear that that's what happened.
So with the Harper fragment, will you go into detail about that for those of us who maybe not so keen on the Harper?
Oh, sure. The Harper fragment was a piece of occipital bone, which is the back right. It was the lower right back portion of the skull. It was found by a guy named Harper. It was turned over, and it's now disappeared. But fortunately, we have photographs of it. We have all the documentation, but the bone itself is gone, which is kind of funny when you have the evidence, but you don't have the evidence, right? But yeah, it was picked up and turned in the same day, and we have all the information on it, and now we don't know where it's at. So,
like many important things, in 60 years that we don't have. So, yeah, I'm just really interested going past that. The alias that he had just in general about we're talking about Joannides, and I wanted to get your thoughts basically on what I know you're not really high on Mr. Morley, but just what he was able to bring out or discover with these particular documents, because I know you've been able to go well beyond that and way through the forest with the document disclosure that But
well, my thing about Morley's work, it's all based around the CIA, and I'm not really sure what he's digging. I mean, he might be just digging for specifics, but he's digging for specifics when he doesn't understand the general layout. So I don't know what the hell he's doing. I mean, for me, if you want, the CIA involvement is JM Wave, right? Shackley, Joannides, and Morales, and then you got, of course, Angleton, and then Dulles, the master of knowing everything and nothing at the same time. And so beyond that, you have the contract agents, Ferrie and all those guys. I mean, you got to think all these mob guys were CIA also. They really were. Like Sergi Arcacha and Emilio Santana. They're anti-Castro Cubans, right? But they worked for Marcelo in fucking New Orleans, right? So they were acting on behalf of mafia, not the anti-Castro Cuban stuff. So sorry, I lost my point there for a second.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I just found it interesting you sent out a document last night. And for those who don't know, we've been talking mostly about the past couple of weeks about the duplicates of the CIA assets that have been out there in 1963. And that document that you sent that I read last night about Marguerite Oswald, that was pretty fascinating. Will you explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I got it here somewhere. Let me pull it up. So this document is a cover sheet. Where is it? Yeah, I can't find it offhand. If you could find it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll look
But
at it real quick for you.
basically, it's a cover sheet. It's dated in 1960, and it indicates it was a memo from the FBI to, I don't remember if it was the CIA or to ONI, but it basically stated that there's a 986-page document on Marguerite Oswald, and this is in 1960, before the assassination. Like, why they would have 986 pages on her is beyond me. Well, other than the fact that she was in the Navy Waves program, and they hid that from us for some reason. But it's that if you read down at the bottom, it basically says what's in the file, and part of it says rap sheet. So Marguerite Oswald has a rap sheet that nobody knows about, arrest somewhere that was
Yeah, I see
hidden,
that.
right? So that to me connects to connects to the 1941 New Jersey stuff, right? So there was an Office of Security file from the CIA that was originated in ONI that mentions Marguerite Oswald, New Jersey, and Nazis, and it's in 1941. And we don't have this document, but we have references to this document. And so, to me, I feel like it would be connected to that some way, because I think I remember reading somewhere that there was a communist association through people that she knew back in that era, because the FBI was asking people from that era if they knew about her associations with communism back then, which is weird. But yeah, I think it's connected to that stuff. But obviously, she got arrested. Well, one of them got arrested. And I'm just going to say this: the more that I dig into this Marguerite Oswald stuff, there was a guy who put out a book named Duran. I think his name was Robert Duran, perhaps, and he put out a book basically expanding on John Armstrong's work. And he tentatively identified with really kind of made up facts. I think he was on the right track, but he made up the fact that this woman named Amanthe Voitier, who's a cousin of Marguerite Oswald, had a son named Leon, and he wrote the whole book about how it was Amanthe Voitier is actually Marguerite Oswald. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, it's bullshit. So I go dig into Amanthe Voitier, and I think that he was right, honestly. The lack of details for Amanthe Voitier's life ending in 56, when the switcheroo actually occurred, because I'm writing my book on the Oswalds, and the actual official switch of official addresses occurred in 1956. So every address from Oswald's history is 100% provably where Lee lived with his mother and sometimes with his two brothers. That ends in 56. In 56, all the official addresses switch to this other woman who's most certainly Marguerite Oswald. She's only 5'1". Marguerite Oswald was 5'7". Okay. Marguerite Oswald was good looking and thin. She was an icon of fashion, they called her. And we all know what this Marguerite looks like, right? Even people who knew Marguerite in the past, like Myrtle Evans, said when they saw her on television, they're like, yeah, that's not Marguerite. Who the hell is that? She got so old. And so in digging into with all these little facts, I started digging into Amanthe Voitier, and I'm pretty convinced. I don't think we'll ever know because we're missing documents, but that's a name that needs to be FOIA'd because there's virtually no information on her whatsoever. She's linked with one address for 42 years. From the time she's born for 42 years. No one does that. And then before that, her father's connected to that same address for 20 years. Nobody does that. That's just crazy. And then her whole life disappears in 1956. The same year they do the official switch when they move to the Collinwood address in Fort Worth. But see, then the Collinwood address brings up a whole slew of other problems because we have proof in the form of John Pick's application to the Air Force. He put in February of 56, he put 2000 or 3006 Bristol Road, which is where the real Marguerite was living. So in 56, they did the switcheroo from the real Marguerite to this other woman. It sounds crazy until you actually go through the documents and you look at the photographs and all this stuff. But it's 100% true. And actually between 55 and 58, I'm running into some conflicting information that doesn't fit with either Oswald or his mother, which leads me to indicate that there might be even somebody else using the name Oswald while working at the Dolly Shoe Company back in 1950. What year was it? 1955. But then the Dolly Shoe Company opens up a whole slew of problems because they might have backdated the dates that Oswald worked there. But see, when you get into the Oswald story, it's all consuming. It is crazy. And I find it far more intriguing than the assassination itself. because it leads to other things. Like, what else were they doing in the 40s that they need to do some identity transfer operation with this kid? Why? What's the point? And so I'm so glad the Joannides stuff came out with that alias and what Mary Haverstitch put on her Twitter, because that's an identity transfer operation. Exactly what that was. And that's exactly what I'm talking about with the Oswald stuff. It's not crazy, and there's more and more evidence of this kind of stuff coming out every day. So.
Yeah, I know, and I'm just surprised now because, again, like I mentioned, the lone nutters, the lone guys that believe that Oswald was just some crazy madman that decided to wake up one day, he's having problems with his wife, and he's just like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and shoot the president. I mean, like, it makes no sense to me. Just like, anything that happened afterwards, and then just so easily you peg him to be at the movie theater, to send all these officers over there right away. All of it just doesn't add up. And so that's just my 2 cents on it.
The thing I don't understand that I want to understand is, going back through his childhood, there had to have been, through his mother and his aunt, there had to have been government contacts that we don't know anything about.
Yes.
There are so many huge voids in the documentation that we really don't. I mean, when I really think about it, and when you think of like a bureaucracy and how much paperwork they produce, it's disgusting. I mean, I bet you the FBI produces 1 million pages a day or more, right? Like, it's just, and like, what do we have really? 32,000 pages of FBI files, 3,000 pages CIA files. Hell, we only have like, we don't have any of Garrison's files. I'm telling you with certainty, we have like 2% or 3% of Garrison's files. And I think a lot of the evidence for that comes from that Garrison Sprague conference document, because they talk about all kinds of stuff that's not in any of his records at all.
Yeah, that's really interesting, the Garrison Sprague thing, and that's what I'm going to be doing research into next. I mean, you really, I don't want to say hyped it up for me, but I mean, like, I believe where you're coming from on this. I mean, like, I'm really excited to, sink my teeth in the, what they have available. I mean, I'm sure they just have, there's so many different angles that they don't have available. But I mean, Garrison was just, I mean, that guy was really, really on it back in 1967, as you suggested.
Yeah, and when he points out all the second and third layer connections that are beyond the scope of normal Kennedy research, you start to see people in places they're like, what the hell? Like that guy, what was his name? Was his name Lazar? I think his name was Lazar, the guy who worked for the Lincoln Mercury dealer, right? Where Oswald went to do a test drive, which has become a staple of the story, right? Because as a setup story, Oswald goes there and he's like, hey, I'm going to come back in a couple of weeks when I got a bunch of money, right? That sounds like, I'm going to get a bunch of money from killing the president, right? And that was kind of like, I think, why they planted it. But that guy, Lazar, who was running that place, he only worked there 9 months, and he was a lifelong spook. Other than that, so it's like,
well, yeah, and just like the rest of the people, that we talk about, like the Paynes and everybody. I mean, to me, it was just like they were all planted there for a certain period of time, and then there you go. They all had a certain role that they were playing, which is just, if you would have told me this before, like, like just researching this case, I thought I would have laughed at you, but now that I've like really dug into this, I mean, like, it makes sense. I mean, all the dots connect on that.
So the deeper you dig into the fine details, the more everything in the world just falls apart.
Like, oh, absolutely.
It's crazy. Yeah. It is crazy. Like, absolutely. Everyone thinks that Oswald was a radar operator. Oswald wasn't a radar operator. Oswald was, at the best, the closest anyone can ever put him to a radar unit is as a plotting board operator. Joseph Gajewski, who was his sergeant out in Atsugi for a time, he said he was great on the plotting board. But if you wanted to be a radar operator, you had to go through a 33-week course. He went through a 6-week course. So not a radar operator, but it's etched into the story, So what else is there? Before I got on with you, I was just digging through John Armstrong's collection of the autopsy documents because I'm looking for scars and whatnot. And so I didn't realize this, but between the time Oswald was autopsied and then Oswald was buried, he grew scars on his left arm that weren't there during the autopsy. That's weird. And he didn't have okay, so when he's in when he's in Atsugi, I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's really long and twisted, but he's trying to avoid going to, where was it? It was either Taiwan or was it the Philippines? Yeah, Taiwan. No, it was the Philippines the first time. So he's trying to get out of going to the Philippines. And so he actually, what he does is he shoots himself in the left arm. It says in the documents it was an accidental discharge, but he later told people that he did it on purpose. He had surgery. He had the bullet removed. He should have a huge scar behind his left arm. That wasn't there at the autopsy at all. No scars on the arm. So that's really strange. But that's what I was digging into. If you out there haven't listened or haven't read through John Armstrong's document collection, it's the best in the world. I've read a chunk of like Weisberg, and I've read all of Garrison, and there's good stuff in there for sure, but there's a lot of unnecessary junk. Armstrong's collection is like very finely tuned, and not only does he have the original documents, he has his handwritten notes in there with it also. Like it's the best. Oh, wow. It's the best in the world. It is the absolute best. Now I don't ascribe to anything that he says after 1959 at all. He kept trying to insert this to Oswald thing into the setup in the assassination, and that was like it's almost an embarrassing failure on his part. But his work up until Oswald leaves the Marines is like perfect. I haven't gotten to Oswald in Russia yet. I'm putting that off till after I finish this book, and then I'm going to get to Oswald in Russia. But I'm anticipating there to be some shenanigans over there too. I guess recently I read that Marina's uncle, who was KGB, was most likely a double agent, and that's how he got everything, sorted out. So I have to dig into that a little more. But I'm really fascinated by some of the Russian stuff because some of the pictures don't make sense. Like the picture of them holding their baby, that looks like a doll. It doesn't look like a baby. There's a lot of crazy stuff with Russia. He used a different name, Alec, or did he? Right? The picture with him and Marina on the bridge, he's not much taller than she is, and she's like 5'1" or 5'2".
Yeah.
So there's a lot of weird stuff in Russia, and I'm half excited and half dreading getting to it.
Well, I mean, and again, in that world back then, I mean, just when you're growing up as a kid, you look back then, you're like, it was a lot more innocent back then, and you have that perception. But as you start reading into how dirty these people were, especially JFK and a lot of the people that surrounded it, I'm not sitting here knocking JFK, but it is what it is. I mean, like the guy was not a very squeaky clean guy.
Not at all.
He came to, and he had multiple mistresses, and so many things that I've gathered, and yeah, he wasn't, he essentially signed his own death certificate with the CIA by the way that he was. I mean, like, through whether, he trying to take over command when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Khrushchev, space thing that they were talking and planning together. And of course, the other entities that you've laid out before, Cory. But, LBJ, that guy was just a hound dog. He was a horrible person. And then, you can just name people, and every their appearance appears to be squeaky clean, but they were just absolute shitbags.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And so it's interesting to me. And so, like, it's up to the person who actually, how deep you want to delve into this, because you're going to, that respect meter goes down and down and down and down and down and down to a point where you're just like, okay, well, I mean, wow. I don't know. I don't know where I was really going with that, but I just, for me, since I've been looking into this and a lot of the stuff that you've given to me as well, that's been my perception as of lately. I kind of feel filthy after reading a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. So, you got any questions or anything you want to talk about in particular?
I got a lot. Yeah, I know. I want to get into, you mentioned, well, you're talking about Armstrong and post 55. One thing especially you talk about Kerry Thornley in the movie theater and whatnot, for people who really want to know about the movie theater situation, where was Armstrong's, I mean, did he label that, kind of like erroneous, or was that pretty accurate in your assumption?
No. So Armstrong in his book, he only mentions the name Kerry Thornley in the whole 1,000-page small print book twice. And so this is where he really disappoints me. And And I kind of understand why he went this direction, because you kind of have these crossroads you get to. And he put all his eggs in the basket of there being two Oswalds. And he was right, but it wasn't that his two Oswald theory ended in 59 for all intent and purposes, from what I can tell. But he continued all through the assassination. So all the impersonations of Oswald at the shooting range and everywhere, he attributed to this other Oswald. He attributed to the real Lee Oswald, while Harvey Oswald was taking the fall. And it's so embarrassing. I mean, I don't even like talking about it because it's so bad. It's such a terrible theory. Because here's the thing: let's say you're doing an identity transfer operation to get a spy into the Soviet Union. It's an old school naval intelligence, pre-Cold War plot, obviously, because it began in 45 at the latest. Right? So this is before the CIA. It's definitely naval intelligence. So you have this plot that's developing to get a spy into the Soviet Union. I'm sure it was partially experimentation, right? And so once you get the spy into the Soviet Union, the mission is accomplished. You're done. And the identities have been switched. And then you have the original Lee Oswald going off with an alias for the rest of his life, doing another identity transfer operation. Because I think I already told the story about last time about Mae Brussels and what was his name? Donald Norton, right? The Donald Norton stuff is interesting because when you dig into Donald Norton, that appears to be another identity transfer operation also, because the real Donald Norton isn't the guy who met with Mae Brussels, right? So it gets complicated, but just because there's one identity transfer going on doesn't mean it's limited to that. That same operation could be connected to a separate identity transfer operation, and the people overlap. And I think that's what we have going on here in the 55, 56, possibly even through 58 era, because I have such contradictions that I can't put either person working at Dolly Shoe. I can't put either Oswald at Dolly Shoe starting in February at all. And Oswald didn't have his work permit issued till March 10th that year. So how could he start working without his work permit from the government beforehand, which you need as an employer to have, right? So it seems like that stuff might have been backdated. The descriptions of Oswald and his mother, who were both working there, do not match either person in the story, or either potential Marguerite Oswald. So yeah, so I think there might have even been other operations going on connected to this. It seems like Lee Oswald was a name that just got used to a certain extent. So, because later on you get stories while Oswald's in Russia, you get stories of Oswald up in New York City in Greenwich Village doing spy shit up there. And I'm like, I haven't even really touched that yet. It's past my purview so far. But yeah, so these identity transfer operations are definitely all over the place, and Oswald was clearly in it. And I don't understand the relationship between the intelligence agencies, how they work together, you know. So, because obviously at some point Oswald got handed off from ONI to CIA, or maybe on loan, or I don't know how that works. But to me, the whole phone call to John Hurt thing is proof he was calling Nag's head. Jesus Christ. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'd like to understand the relationships that the intelligence agencies have between each other a lot more, because I just don't understand how information flows back and forth, you know, or any of that stuff.
Well, there's one thing clear. I mean, like when it comes to obviously you mentioned Israel before, and how they control things and whatnot. But I mean, like when it comes to the control of the CIA and these other intelligence agencies that you just spoke about, their level of control globally. Obviously they had something to do with the murder of Patrice Lumumba, and then Diem out of Vietnam. It seems like if you were supposed to do an uprising, you're trying to do an uprising. If you look at Castro, they repeatedly tried to assassinate him over and over and over. However, in my personal opinion, if they wanted to get it done, they would have got it done. Maybe I'm off base on that, but
are you talking about Castro?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think that stuff is a joke. Like, I think it's a total joke. I mean, they got him into power, right? They overthrew Batista and put him in place, and then all of a sudden, they want to oust him. I don't think so. Number one, it looked really good to have a communist 90 miles off the coast, the ever-present danger, right? So that looks good. Number one, to have him there, right? And so I don't buy any of that attempts on Castro at all. The exploding cigars and the poison and all that stuff with Lorenz or whatever her name is. Like, I don't buy any of that stuff at all. It just doesn't make sense to me at all, because Cuba was Cuba's used as a big jump off point for smuggling operations. You go from Miami down to Cuba and then to Haiti, and then you bounce off to Europe, right? So it seemed to me as though Castro was like held at a distance, but on the take at the same time. That's the best description that I can give of it, or at least how it appears to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at it and I'm just like, everything that they've told us, if you look back and Frank Sturgis specifically, I mean, that guy I think was the biggest liar I've ever.
Hmm.
The guy
Yeah.
would just sprout stories over and over. He went on Inside Edition back in I think 1992 and said that the KGB killed or they were involved with killing the president, and that he even admitted himself that he was a gunman that shot Kennedy. And you have a lot of these guys, even the E. Howard Hunts of the world. I mean, which he's another one. I mean, like a lot of these guys, I feel like they're just thrown out there to kind of pepper and to disillusion people.
So there's that story about him catching a ride with the Diaz-Lanz brothers and Marie de Lorenz, and I don't know, I never found any substantiation for any of that stuff at all. I early in my research back in like 2018, I dug into those guys and that whole thing, and all the popularized commercial takes on the assassination, and like they didn't go anywhere. So I don't really know. I mean, Sturgis was probably there because I think all of them had to be there. I think it was part spectacle, part ritual. I don't know. They had to be there. All of them were there. I'm convinced of this. Yitzhak Rabin flew in the night before, right? So like everybody was there. Bill Harvey even said, "I'm going to Dallas to see what happens," right? So I'm convinced it was just Dealey Plaza was a closed scene, right? They had barricades up. Who was it? The guy that people aren't sure, I forget his name, Gordon something. People aren't sure if he was really there or not.
Gordon Arnold, yeah.
Yeah, Gordon Arnold, right? So ultimately, it doesn't even matter if he was there or not, but he did say that there were barricades and all this stuff. His story to me is fairly believable. He doesn't really give off any major physical signs of lying, but so yeah, I believe it was blocked off. There were people up there keeping other people out, and I think that most of those people in Daily Plot, if you look at those pictures, like the vast majority of those people in the aftermath have never been identified.
Yeah,
they really
but
haven't.
I call bullshit on the badge man photo. I mean, like you can make out so many different images if you wanted to. From Mormon's photo was really super small, and what you can make out Darth Vader if you want to out of that. You know what I mean? Like I have a hard time believing that the badge man scenario is actually legit.
I agree with you 100%. But I know that it was confirmed, I believe, that there was one cop up in that area, in the area of the Knoll where it met the bridge, allegedly, named House, which kind of struck me because David Wayne House got arrested on the way back to Fort Worth. And so I always wondered if there was a connection there between the arrest of David Wayne House and House, who was the cop who was basically in the same area over by the concrete portion and near the railroad yard. So yeah, a lot of interesting connections, but I have a feeling a lot of the duplicate names that we see are definitely connected.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd like to, and we're going to get back to the Joannides thing in just a bit to cap that off, but one other thing, I mean, I thought about it over the week, was the Samuel Ruby thing. And again, for those of you out there who haven't watched the Jack Ruby press conference when Lee Harvey Oswald was doing his press conference, you'd be fascinated to see like how Samuel Ruby and Jack Ruby look alike. It's just absolutely, it just boggles my mind. I cannot believe when you mentioned that, that blew my mind.
Yeah, I have a picture of the two of them together at like a wedding, like in the 1940s or something like that. And back then, the similarity was even more striking. It's like, oh my God, it looked like the same person. It was crazy. It really was crazy. You see, because Jack Ruby, he's seen, we're at Parkland Hospital. He's seen all over the place, right? You can't be in two places at once. And the whole weekend he is. But he had to go to Galveston, and there's a FBI report. Somebody placed him in Galveston. A kid was in, I forget if it was a hardware store or a sporting goods store, but he puts Jack Ruby in Galveston where he was buying or selling a gun. He was dealing with a gun with the guy behind the counter. Which is weird because the gun that shot Oswald is allegedly came from Joe Cody, right? A gift from Joe Cody. That's the story. So what was he doing doing something with a gun down in Galveston? But that completely fits with the other incidentals. So the blonde woman who's seen at the Alamo Motel, right? There's no blonde woman allegedly with David Ferrie in them, but David Ferrie wasn't on that trip, right? So Jack Ruby had, for my calculations, he had to take Andrew Blackman back to his boat. Blackman came in on the boat. You know, I've heard some people say that they've identified the boat as the Mataranga, but I have not been able to like confirm that. But he allegedly came in like a couple days before the assassination. He was back on his boat by Sunday. They took out of the harbor on Monday. And then he was interviewed by like everybody in the world on Tuesday, right? So they were even on to Blackman. And he was in like, it wasn't the Coast Guard, it was like Merchant Marine or something like that. So yeah. And then when you go back to the Dear Bastard letter, where he's talking to, he says, Dear Bastard, right? It's David Ferrie writing a letter to somebody and talking about, hey, next time you come in, bring some more of that stuff. He called it like euphoria or something. He's like, what was that stuff? He's like, bring more of it, a lot next time you come, right? And I'm like, well, duh, that kind of corresponds with the heroin story from Rose Sheremy, right? With Arcacha and Santana, who were going to go to Dallas to shoot the president, right? Like those pieces all fit together. So, damn, I forgot my point. Did I have a point in there somewhere?
We were just talking about Samuel and Jack Ruby and
yes.
how.
Yeah, so Jack had to go to Galveston. And so by what I figure is, you know, that story about him coming back in and waking them up and going to see the billboard or whatever it is, that's kind of a stupid story with Crawford and George Senator. I think that's kind of a BS story to cover for the fact that Jack was just getting back from Galveston then, and then he goes to shoot Oswald the next morning. But see, he's seen in the basement for like 2 hours. He's there at like 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And who's his best friend in Dallas? George Butler, who's like the head of the police union, right? So it's obvious to me George Butler let him in. When you read everything about George Butler that day, the guy was like scared out of his mind. He was like a ghost. So I think it's pretty obvious he was let in early in the morning by George Butler, and then Samuel bought the money orders. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. And
so,
go ahead.
What would you say to the people out there that are that say that Jack was actually apprehensive of shooting Oswald?
I don't think he had a choice. So the first person he called after Oswald gets arrested, because I'm convinced Oswald was supposed to die in the theater. See, I'm conflicted over what happened in the theater as far as Oswald and the gun, because Oswald never ordered that gun, right? The one that ended up at Railroad Express. All the gun stuff was set up. He could have just gone to a store and bought one for cash. No ID, no nothing, and everything would have been hunky-dory, right? But no, he left this big paper trail. It's all fake. He obviously didn't have the gun. But witnesses inside the theater who were unconnected to the spooks or the police said that they saw the gun in Oswald's hand. So I don't understand how that series of events happened. One of the police statements indicates the gun somehow ended up on the floor. So they go to grab Oswald, the gun comes out, they wrestle over it, it ends up on the floor, Oswald gets his ass kicked, and they drag him out the front, right? So, but then you have the second Oswald arrested up, you know, from Butch Burroughs, who said that it was another man 4 or 5 minutes later, arrested in the balcony. He said if it wasn't Oswald, could have been his brother. You know, the same thing that we get at the Tippit shooting. The exact same thing from Doris Holland at the Tippit shooting. She said if it wasn't Oswald, it was his twin brother. And there's only 2 Oswald impersonators. Well, 2 main Oswald impersonators. You have other people who are leaving Oswald's name in various places. But as far as people who looked like Oswald, who were mistaken for Oswald, it's William Seymour and Kerry Thornley. Those are the 2.
Yeah.
And so, and that's kind of how you can narrow down like the Tippit shooter, because number one, it's the relationship between David Ferrie and Kerry Thornley, which goes back to the Perry Russo stuff. The bearded beatnik, who they said was Lee Oswald at the party. Jesus Christ. Oswald was always clean shaven. He was always very neat, always clipped his fingernails. That guy didn't have whiskers. He never had any of that stuff, right? He's definitely not a bearded beatnik who walked around with no shoes and had big toenails.
Yeah,
that's Kerry Thornley.
Definitely.
Okay, because he was a fucking hippie, right? And so once you understand the relationship there and the conversations about the triangulation of Crossfire and all that stuff, and you're like, oh, okay. And then you see all these impersonations of Oswald going on. Well, really mostly in New Orleans. You see, this is where it gets complicated, because you have Oswald in Dallas, but in the end of April, Oswald goes to New Orleans, and he's there until the end of August, beginning of September, and then he goes back to Dallas. At the exact same time, you have Kerry Thornley, who was in New Orleans. He has a 2-week overlap with Oswald, but then he disappears to Whittier, California, and he's gone till when? The end of August, beginning of September. He crosses he goes, and actually on his way to Whittier, he takes a bus through Mexico City. On his way back from Whittier, he takes a bus through Mexico City. So he visits Mexico City twice in the lead up to the alleged Oswald visit in Mexico City. So he gets back into New Orleans on September 4th.
Mm-hmm.
This is when Perry Russo interacts with him. He interacts with him 3 times at Ferrie's apartment before that party occurred. And so when he interacted with him at the house before the party, he had a full beard. Like that's the bearded beatnik stuff. And he drew the picture on the picture of Oswald. He drew a beard and said, "That's him." Right. So we have perfect timing with Kerry Thornley's return to New Orleans, him being a bearded beatnik, the statements made by Perry Russo, and that all definitely connects to Tippett, because once you realize that William Seymour is over by the Tidy Lady Laundry at about 1:50, 1:55 p.m. That's about 10 blocks away from the Tippett shooting. He never could have made it there in time to shoot Tippett by, what was it, 106, right? And he's got different clothes. He's not wearing the same clothes as described by witnesses to the Tippett shooting. So it's definitely not William Seymour. William Seymour will end up, him and Lawrence Howard. This comes directly from the Robert Vinson book, Flight from Dallas. Robert Vinson, I 100% believe his story, because who does he describe? A large husky Latin and Lee Harvey Oswald, right? It's the same description of these idiots all over the place, right? So it's clearly Howard and Seymour getting on that plane and getting the hell out of Dodge, right? So, which is the smartest thing they did. And William Seymour, everybody, is still alive. Just so you know, William Seymour is still alive. He lives in Arizona somewhere. I'm not a guy who goes out and does interviews, so I haven't really called him, or I've thought about it, and kind of makes me nervous. So I'd like someone else to do it. But
Yeah, well, there's an interesting story about Peter Janney. And I don't want to really go off course right now, but Peter Janney is the son of a CIA agent, and he grew up in the whole CIA community. And anyhow, you've heard the name Mary Pinchot Meyer, obviously.
yeah,
You're
Cordmeyer's wife, right?
yeah, and so she was assassinated or murdered going for a walk, and anyhow, Janney wrote in the book that basically, he figured out who the gentleman was that murdered him, and he went to the guy's house, and I guess the guy was a biology scientist or something like that was teaching somewhere at a university, but he, showed up at his doorstep and said, "Hey, I got this book out, and I believe that you're the one that killed Mary Meyer," and they got into a really tense, standoff, which is just crazy because that, like you said, if you not to say that William Seymour was in any depths of that one guy, I'll have to get that information, but it's just crazy just to think about that.
So
So.
Seymour and Lawrence Howard are really fascinating individuals. They get out of the army in 59 or 60, and immediately they're set up down in No Name Key with Jerry Hemming and all those Interpen guys, right? Dennis Harbor and the whole crew. Ralph Schlafter. There's a whole bunch of them. That's an interesting operation because they're funded by the CIA, but they're really just mercenaries. And I thought mercenaries were fucking illegal. I didn't think you were allowed to be a mercenary in America, and go fight war for another country. It's like a violation of there's some law about it. You can't go fight in another country's war unless it's Israel, of course, right? Fucking A. Or Ukraine, all of a sudden. But normally, you're not allowed to do that kind of stuff, right? You're definitely not allowed to be doing raids down on Cuba as a private citizen. You know what I mean? So the whole operation is really strange to me, but I think there was a lot more going on down there. I read somewhere early in my research that guys like Dave Yaris were even taken down there to train. The guy's mafia. You know what I'm saying? That guy's mob. And so he's going down there to train with CIA snipers. Wild stuff. This is the stuff that I'm really interested in that we'll never ever. They can't tell us this stuff. They can't tell us the depths of the dirt that they've done.
No, they can't, and a lot of that stuff is going to be buried pretty much. It's going to be buried forever. I mean, it will never see the light of day. And that's why my take last week on, and you made a really good point countering with me about the files and how I said there was no important files that were going to be released. And, you said there's plenty of them out there, which now, I mean, I really, I'm on the same side with you there, but when it comes to the grand scheme of things, it's just like, that March stump that they had there, and I said this last week, it's just, that was a waste of time. That's just Cuba and Russia leftover crap that was on there, other than maybe the Underhill document. So,
Well, let me make a statement on documents in general. Like, documents they present data.
mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself doesn't necessarily automatically connect to anything else,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you
Yes.
have to read a huge number of documents to be able to say, hey, this here connects with this over here, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. So when David Ferrie shows up in Hammond, Louisiana, Thomas Compton says he's driving a light blue Ford Falcon station wagon. Okay. Where else is there a light colored Ford Falcon station wagon in the story? The house on Belmont in Fort Worth, where David Wayne House got arrested from.
Mm-hmm.
When the cops show up on scene, they call out, there's a light colored Ford Falcon here also. And that's the house, obviously, where 2 people got arrested. So that was probably some kind of safe house or something along those lines, right? So from that, you can kind of extrapolate that after Ferrie left the Tippit shooting, he went to the house on Belmont, because that's when the cops show up after that and call that out over the radio, right? So he leaves there in the gray Plymouth and swaps cars with the light colored Ford Falcon, which he then drives to Hammond, which the Ford Falcon is then seen by Thomas Compton, right? So that's not going to be in any document, and that's a conclusion drawn based on training and experience, right? And understanding police reports and that kind of thing. So documents alone are nothing; they're dots, and they don't do any good. Like, Jefferson Morley can dig up every fucking dot in the world on Kennedy, and if he doesn't make attempts to connect them, they've done nobody any good. So
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. You know what's interesting? If you look at the messages tonight that I've been putting out, if you guys take a look at the picture of Kerry Thornley, it just absolutely just, if you squint your eyes and you look at the picture itself, I mean, the guy could be a dead ringer, dead ringer. I mean, it absolutely blows my mind.
Barbara Reed saw them together at the Bourbon House, and she said that Kerry is fun. This is funny. She said that Kerry Thornley was always like, he's a beatnik guy. He's got rough stubble, and he's got longer hair, and like he's just always dirty looking, right? She saw them at the Bourbon House, and he was all clean cut with a haircut and shaved and everything, and she said they looked like the Bobbsey twins or something like that.
Mm.
So he intentionally cleaned himself up to look like Oswald. He had the same receding hairline. This is another issue. He is about an inch taller than the Oswald we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that becomes kind of obvious when you start to see the different descriptions of Oswald. That 1 inch makes a difference. It's really unbelievable. But like all the stuff through Alice, Texas, like after he leaves Mexico City, he'll go on a road trip with Marina and her kid through Alice, Texas, while Oswald allegedly is staying at the YMCA in Dallas. What date would that be? That would have been October 3rd. But from October 2nd all the way through the 5th, we got numerous Oswald sightings with a woman who didn't speak English with a child, So that's where, and then, when you go back to the statements of the neighbors of Oswald who said that Kerry Thornley had a relationship with Marina and Lee, and that they saw them going to the grocery store, and she saw Thornley so often she wasn't sure which guy she was married to. So yeah, Kerry Thornley lied about all that stuff. He's a really good liar. And when you really dig into Thornley, I think he got recruited back in high school. He was a nerd. That guy was like, from the time he was in like middle school, winning science fairs, essay competitions, like you name it, and he won it at some point growing up. And then he does the Voice of Democracy contest, which anything with the word democracy in it's run by the CIA. Just is how it goes. And so the Voice of Democracy contest, he wins that thing. And then shortly after that, he joins the Marine Reserves. And this is where things get really, really interesting with Kerry Thornley, because he lied about his real military background. So when you're in the Marine Reserves, you're just kind of like, you don't really do much. You show up like, I don't know, once every in a while, and you just do some training or something, and it's just kind of holding you out until you get out of high school kind of thing.
Hmm.
That's not what Kerry Thornley did. Kerry Thornley, during his senior year of high school, every single break that he had, like spring break or Christmas break or whatever, he went and did real training. Once he gets out of high school, after the first year of reserves, which when you look at it, he spent a lot of those days, any day he wasn't in school or after school, it's amazing how thick his record is in the military record. And so the next year, he does like amphibious assault training, like heavy firearms, all kinds of stuff, driving a tank, right? This is all during the first 2 years of his alleged reserve period before he got serious about the Marines. Right? This is crazy to me. Then he ends up doing 3 more years. So the guy ends up doing really a total of 5 years in the Marines. And he plays it off like, oh, I just, I went in, I did my thing, I got out, wasn't for me. Bullshit. Bullshit. Yeah, so Kerry Thornley, way more important, way plugged in. He gets to New Orleans. The first person he connects with is Kent Courtney, who's a super right wing, borderline Klan member, National States Rights Party propagandist, CIA funded, of course. He was putting out all kinds of stuff on Latin America and Cuba, just like Gaudet was. And so, where was I going with this? I forget where I was going with this.
Oh, I was just talking about. Well, you were talking about Thornley, but Thornley just in general
Yeah,
about.
but all Thornley's connections in New Orleans are CIA. After that, him and Jessica Luck, they go out to dinner with Martin McAuliffe. Martin McAuliffe, CIA. He's a professor at LSU. He connects Thornley to Guy Bannister, allegedly over the book he wrote about Oswald, the Idle Warriors. So, but yeah, the only people he interacts with once he gets to New Orleans, allegedly February 61, but I think it was more like January 61, because I'm now convinced he was the one at Bolton Ford, trying to get the quote for the Jeeps to send to Cuba. I'm convinced it was Kerry Thornley now, because he has numerous references to Leopoldo, which is Lawrence Howard, and Lawrence Howard, the pockmarked face guy, was the other person there with him. So I'm convinced he was actually in New Orleans in January 61, not February of 61. It's only a month, but it makes a big difference. But yeah, everything he did down there, all the people he hung out with, all connected to CIA. And then he writes Garrison in like 72 or 4 or something like that. He writes Garrison a 50-page affidavit, and he voluntarily connects himself to every spook and mafia guy under the sun. It's a confession letter. Everybody needs to read Garrison's Kerry Thornley files. In there is the 50-page affidavit, and it will blow your mind. He connects himself to Carlos Marcello. He connects himself to Leopoldo, who's Lawrence Howard and those guys. We know that Kerry Thornley interacted with Lauren Hall in Whittier, California at one of the meetings of the National States Rights Party. So yeah, everybody needs to read it's only like 3 files, maybe 150 pages. It'll blow your mind what's in there, and it's all a confession.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, and getting back to the Garrison Sprague file. So when you talk about that, like how it, I mean, what volume have you read of that? I mean, have you read pretty much? I mean, what's out there right now and what's missing?
there's one document. It's about 250 pages long. I've been doing it on my podcast over 9 episodes. I'm going to do another one tomorrow. It is very frustrating to me because they met no less than 3 times. They had at least 3 conferences, and there's only one document from one of them. And it's not
Hmm.
even the whole thing. It's from the first day of 3. So the first time they met, which I believe is this one, they met for 3 days. We got the tapes from the first day only. It's like, this is what I mean when I say we have almost none of Garrison's files. None. I promise you, he was producing a couple hundred to a couple thousand pages per day, and we maybe have, I don't know, 2 or 3,000 pages worth of documents from him. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking. And when Stone actually went to make that movie, JFK in 1992, you'd have to think that he barely even got an inch of what Garrison was able to produce throughout his career before becoming a judge.
Yeah, and so after Garrison was Harry Connick Sr., and
Yeah,
Harry Connick Sr. like took a torch to those files.
yeah, man, just unbelievable. I just that's crazy. But anyways, you talked earlier about the people in Dallas. You know, I know for a fact that Richard Nixon was in Dallas.
Hmm.
He was quote unquote attending a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola seminar,
Yeah, it was.
which
I've heard a couple different things. I heard that it was a bottling convention. I heard it was a PepsiCo company meeting. I've heard a couple different things, so I don't know, but it was something along that. Remember, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola ran drugs for the CIA, right? So
mhm.
it was PepsiCo who had a fucking plant in Laos that they processed morphine into heroin, right? But they never made any Pepsi. So that's in whose book was that in? I forget. That was in one of the classic Kennedy books. So
It's just interesting because if you take a step back and look at it, with all those people going to Dallas, you know, like all those just prominent people, and then you know, as I mentioned, John Zouetre, who got deported 24 hours after the assassination, the Sartes, everybody that is chronicled to have been there at that particular time. It's just, I mean, it was a regular parade for a president. You know, this thing was absolutely just
right,
prearranged,
and
man.
they
I mean, like
invited
it was just,
people. They invited important people to be there. Like there were additional mobsters in that crowd. There were like the Corsicans. So I don't remember if it was Albarelli who traced this down or who, but there are FBI documents that show they were tracing specific known Corsican mafia members who came into New York, then traveled down to Dallas, and they were there during the assassination. When I hear stuff like that, and then I look at the pictures of the people in the crowd who are just cool as a cucumber and have never been identified, it really makes me wonder. So yeah, I have no doubts that the Corsicans were there, but if people were to jump to the conclusion that since they flew the Corsican assassins in, like Hunt said, this would go to show Hunt's compartmentalization, right? Because they weren't shooters at all, at all. It's a big red herring. They've packed that place with people. So when I think that why they did that was because if the FBI actually did a real analysis of the photographs and they started identifying some of these people, it's almost like a message to back the fuck off. You know what I mean?
yeah.
They start identifying
Hmm.
mobsters and potential CIA people, and who else knows what? Like that's a message. Like when Oswald allegedly goes to Mexico City, there was another Oswald sent by naval intelligence to Mexico City. His name was spelled Osswald, spelled differently. Worked for naval intelligence. He got sent down there to go hand out flyers on campuses down there. I think they were anti-communist flyers, but he was down there the exact same dates allegedly that Oswald was there. And then there was like other people in the mix, like there's like an Osvaldo or something like that, Osvaldovich, or there's like another one that's like a Cuban or something like that. And that was in Mexico City at the exact same time, also, right? So I have a feeling when they flood the area with people like this, they're doing it to send a message to the investigators because the investigators aren't stupid. They're going to figure it out
Hmm.
and they're going to be like, oh, that's okay. I get it. Back off, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the red herrings. I mean, I would have to think that there was at least, you know, 50 of them there. I mean, if not more, just as decoys, I would assume, right?
I would assume. I mean, we'll never know specifics,
Mm.
but when you see like patterns forming and them sending all other people named whose name sounds like Oswald or looks like Oswald, it's obviously to muddy the waters because they know the FBI is going to uncover that information. You know,
Yeah. Hey, Lioness, do you have a question in regards to Cory?
I do, Cory, and thanks, Tim. So I would like to just pivot back slightly to Peter Janney and documents. So, something we've talked about here, of course, is identity transfer, really important to this whole thing, obfuscation, red herrings, and so on. So, I'm curious because in Peter Janney's book, he speaks about Robert Turnbull Crowley as well as Gregory Douglas. And Gregory Douglas, is controversial within the research community, and he's considered infamous. He's been labeled a fraud. He does have several aliases. In the book on page 362, he writes, Janney writes, it would seem the elusive, infamous Gregory Douglas, aka Peter Stahl, Walter Storch, may have been somewhat truthful regarding what had transpired between himself and Bob Crowley, but it will never be known how truthful unless Douglas produces both the Crowley cache of documents and the recordings he allegedly made of these conversations. Yet, despite the remaining ambiguity surrounding the Crowley-Douglas affair, the details purportedly revealed by Crowley about Mary Meyer, her diary, and her murder are solidly supported and substantiated by other events and accounts covered in this book. So, my question to you is Gregory Douglas truly a fraud, or is he a person whose identity was transferred amongst various names and that he has some legitimacy tied to his name, or is he truly just a fraudster?
Oh, that I don't have an answer for you. That and details on that have not come into my research purview at all. So
Okay.
I didn't dig into like any of the Mary Pinchot Meyer stuff other than the very superfluously, just to know it existed. So I didn't
Well,
dig into that stuff at all.
thank you, but it really ties. It's bigger, and it really ties more to what he had called Gregory Douglas, stating that he had received documents from Crowley before his death that were internal CIA documents. And he covered them, particularly Operation Zipper, which was tied to the assassination of JFK and the plot that tied the CIA to the FBI, to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and others. It's very clear. And so, what I'm trying to do is understand, really, is that accurate? Because your point made earlier was that we won't get the full story in the documents. And some of these documents, if it's true that Angleton had actually asked him to destroy documents, Crowley, when Jesse James, or I want to call him Jesse James for some reason, I think of him that way, even though it's not his name, but Angleton, anyway, that he had asked him to destroy those right after he was kicked out or whatever, left the CIA. So I guess my question is, would it be worth pursuing and trying to go into the request for some of those documents related? Because in the actual statement of policy that supposedly Crowley wrote, the statement of policy is 32 points, reasons why to justify the assassination. But after that, there are a list of meetings, conferences, and so on that occurred from March 1, 1963 through a certain November, of 1963. And so there are progress reports. They turned over I guess, the dirty work or the wet work, whatever you want to call it, beginning August 1st to William Harvey. And he began giving, according to this document, if it's accurate, progress reports. And those seem to have occurred verbally, but there may have been something in writing if this is indeed accurate. Do you think any of that documentation would be worth pursuing, or would it be futile?
Cory,
I don't.
can I
I
cut in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just my personal opinion from this whole matter, I do think it's worth pursuing. Just because, again, Cory may have a different take on this, but I think anything of that type of juncture with Crowley, Crowley was a really important man in the CIA, and I think there's a lot of legs there when it comes to Douglas. I've been criticized about that before, but I don't give a damn about the criticism. I think it should be pursued. So go ahead, Cory.
So I can't help but think that all of the CIA end of things was represented through Dulles and Angleton and their involvement with Permindex. Because from what I've come to conclude is that Permindex functioned like an oversight board. Because some of the money was funneled through CMC, right, Centre Mondial Commercial, which was run out of Montreal by Louis Bloomfield. And we've got Shaw, Arcacha, Thornley, and Ferrie flying up there, right? You've seen the Lambert document. And so, to me, the trickle down comes from Permindex, of which Dulles and Angleton were members. And so I can't help but think that all of the actual inner planning, because that's where Clay Shaw comes into this, right? And so I don't really understand, or honestly, it's not really too much of my concern what was going on with the CIA at all. Like, it's just not all the work that like Morley does. This doesn't interest me in the least bit. Not because they didn't have decisions, but they were all in on it, right? So to me, it's just an exercise in proving yourself right, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because we already know they were all involved, right? So I don't need to know the details. That's kind of my perspective. I'm more interested in the relationships of the guys in Permindex and the other business dealings that they had, which come into play again with like what was that? The nickel company that they were dealing with down in Cuba, and there's other things that connect to the Kennedy assassination that directly connect back to CMC's holdings and Permindex, right? So to me, the CIA can be completely compartmentalized and represented by Dulles and Angleton on that board. And so I'll just leave all the CIA detail stuff to somebody else. That's kind of how I look at it from an administrative perspective. Now, on the ground, obviously, all the guys are CIA assets or agents, most likely not employees, other than perhaps not even Clay Shaw. Those guys were all contract. So at the actual CIA employee level, like, doesn't even really interest me at all for some reason.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I just think Crowley, as important as his role was, has taken up very little space in this whole situation, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and his name has actually popped up in my feed lately a couple times recently. So,
well, that might be me, because I am totally intrigued by this. The fact that this critical person is there's just nothing really except something that's out there written by this man Gregory Douglas that's so controversial that he's such a fraud. Let's ignore it. So anyway, thank you.
Well, and touching off that real quick, I'm sorry, it's just reading the conversations between Douglas and Crowley. Douglas is heavily criticized because he is known to be a toxic nightmare of a person. But when you're reading what Trumbull Crowley was talking about in his answers, they were very descriptive. They lined up specifically with the timeline from October 62 all the way to November 63. And I mean, there's no bullshit to that, Cory. I mean, like I'm pretty convinced that is an accurate study there that they had.
So thanks for that. But yeah, just reading about it and listening to, someone reading their transcripts of these supposed alleged conversations, they're touching on all sorts of things, adjacent and a little bit separate, but that occur in history later on, because they recorded these things supposedly in the early 1990s. And it's fascinating to me. And when you listen to it and you read it, it rings true, the conversation and all of that. I've done my own types of investigations for my job, with healthcare providers and such, and fraud and everything. That doesn't make me by any means some investigator extraordinaire, but what it does provide me is kind of that inner vibe that you can just tell, does this ring true or not? And if this guy's really a fraudster, he was a damn gifted one. Not that they're not out there, they are. So anyway, thank you.
Right. No problem.
Yeah, so kind of picking up back off that, you mentioned the CIA just angle when it came to like people still working at it and the residuals that have came from 1963. I mean, like your opinion about the ground level, as you said. I mean, what type of fields were these guys in? Are they in? Like the Posners and the current people that are out there right now. I mean, that's kind of a roundabout question, but I'd just like to hear your feedback.
I mean, are you referring to like people like Posner? Are they CIA? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, no, I'm just talking. Yes, exactly. Ground level CIA that still influences things, like Arlen Specter with the magic bullet theory and all that.
It's really hard to say who's CIA, because when you look at how many people they were recruiting in the 60s, by today, you'd think they got everybody. You know what I mean? So I don't even know, man. I don't know. But I don't understand how anybody could put out a book and stick to it for the rest of their life. Whoever gave him that assignment to write that book screwed him for his whole life. Like, because that book... is there a copyright issue if I write a book debunking his book? I mean, because like it's such garbage. And you come to understand it's garbage when you go through the history of Oswald,
Well, it's funny because when he brought out, even off just what Morley brought out on Friday, you looked at it and he was just attacking Morley, this and that. Say what you will about Morley, but like he couldn't even make a case for himself. It was hilarious.
Morley is strange because he appears to be keeping he's swirling the pot, but it never goes anywhere. It's, I don't even want to say it's incremental progress, because it's barely incremental. It's like, I don't even know what the guy does. I mean, he wrote that book on Angleton. I haven't read it. Right? He wrote the book on Shackley. the blonde ghost. Didn't he do that also?
Yes.
Okay. Shackley was never blonde, so I'm intrigued, and I got to read the book at some point. But I have a feeling it's going to go nowhere. You know, he's going to present a bunch of dots. He's not going to connect any of them. That seems what he does.
All right, Charles, do you got any questions tonight? You're on the speaker, so feel free. Cory's here, so jump on in, my man.
I'm good. Sure. Why not? What's your favorite James Bond movie, Cory?
Oh, Dr. No, of course.
Dr. No. Okay. All right, that's cool. Hey, the only other thing I've got, which my story is a little bit of a different tangent, but I am looking for a guy that was a CIA agent that more or less disappeared somewhere around 1966. I mean, this isn't necessarily something you've come across, but he was definitely in the South Pacific as a CIA agent, probably late 50s, early 60s. And then I stumbled upon him, and I believe he's the Lebanon of the Roscoe White story. And he spent the next 15 years from like 1966 into the 80s completely in a remote, invisible location, just basically like he took his money and ran and hid until things calmed down for a very long time. And I don't suppose you've ever come across anybody that fits that kind of description. I'm kind of holding back some of the details. And then the other thing is I am totally intrigued by the Lazar guy. And of course, I've been looking for Lazar for quite some time, and because that guy is in the movie The Man with the Golden Gun, which you may not be familiar with what I'm saying is that the story of The Man with the Golden Gun is an embedded, encrypted story of the characters behind the JFK assassination.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that.
One of the interesting parts about that movie is that J.W. Pepper, who is J.W. Fritz. They just sort of mock him in the movie. He is test driving a car while on vacation. It makes zero sense. It's one of the things where they're like, why does anybody watch a James Bond movie when they put these things in it? They're completely bonkers and out of your mind. But Lazar is in that movie as well. And James Bond says, what is a Lazar? It's not a what, it's a who. Lazar ends up being the guy that actually supplies the bullets to Scaramanga in that movie. But there's at any rate, I have been trying to understand the whole car test drive thing and connection, as well as Lazar.
Oh, gotcha. So that's actually in that movie?
Lazar, yeah.
Holy shit. Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, a lot of times they use a double, as I've more or less decoded most of the James Bond books and movies. A lot of times they use a double, like there's two Lazars more or less,
Right.
and it seems like that's but it's one of those things where the two Lazars are completely unrelated, but they combine them into one person to sort of double up on its meaning. But again, that's but you don't have any information about any CIA agent would have been like the third shooter of the Roscoe White story that disappeared in '66.
No,
And
I
I guess
don't.
it wouldn't be Lazar, would it?
No. So the Roscoe White stuff, like, it just doesn't go anywhere. And when you start to assemble the pieces of the puzzle around what actually happened in the book depository, like when you compile all the witness statements and you actually figure out that, like, things like the second floor lunchroom with a Coke story, total myth, never happened. The actual incident happened between the third and fourth floors, and the guy they stopped was wearing a light brown jacket and some sort of collared shirt underneath it. So when you start to assemble the different details of what actually happened, Roscoe White doesn't come into the picture at all, right? So I don't buy the Roscoe White story just because it doesn't fit with any of the facts on the ground.
Well, one of the key aspects of it is that there are two separate diaries completely. And in Roscoe's diary, and I'm also narrowing down, the only thing they have in the Roscoe White story is the fact that they named the names Mandarin, Lebanon, and Saul in that book. That is really kind of almost all that they have. The rest of it is piecing together through what they think in their theories. The pure part of it is that. Then you look at the story of Rene Dussac, and you have these same three people. You've got Rene is Saul in that book. Target JFK. His name is identified as Saul, and he was working with a ex-marine and then a CIA agent. And then of course you could look at Roscoe White, and he was working with a man named Saul.
Mhm.
Then he's the ex-marine. But not only that, but you actually those elements play into the James Bond um, series. The whole element there comes with I guess I gotta put it out because I'm guessing you haven't heard it. Is that my great uncle? Um, it's sort of the wishing or the blessing of Donovan. Worked with Ian Fleming to tell the stories of James Bond. They were really within the files of Donovan's original agents.
Oh, interesting.
And when
Charles, I
yes,
need to hey, real quick. I need to cut in.
okay,
So when it comes to your uncle, because I don't think Cory knows who your uncle is, just give him a brief description of who your uncle was.
I'll make it
That way he has.
real quick. Head of AT&T Long Lines Plant Department.
Oh,
If you understand what that
yeah.
is, I mean, he was in charge of the shadow government. I hate using that term, but the AT&T Long Lines, they ran the continuity of governance, and a slang term for that is shadow government. He was in that involved building the bunkers, Mount Weather, Greenbrier. It also involved he was in charge of national network news. He didn't get to decide what they said, but take for example, if we were in war and you only had CBS and Mutual and NBC, and you only had resources to broadcast only one of them because lines are down and so forth, he got to decide what station was broadcast. He controlled the president's phone when the president traveled. He helped develop the nuclear football. He was also a CIA agent as well. He worked for British intelligence in 1941. He spent time in a Japanese prison. Long story. So the stories of that that's like his public side, and he was helped connect the phone call to Air Force One to the White House. His mother was murdered, and then his mother's funeral was scheduled for the literal exact minute that JFK died. Uh, so he didn't even make it to his own mother's funeral because he had to stop Curtis LeMay from launching nukes out of Canada.
That's pretty crazy. Yeah, I have a spook uncle also. Actually, he died when I was like 6.
Okay.
But I had a spook uncle too, named Paul Hemingway Gale. He was personal friends with Donovan. He was founding member of OSS, founding member of CIA, and he worked at the CIA station in Iran under the Shah.
Okay.
Interesting stuff. There's nothing on the guy. I can't find a goddamn thing. Nothing. No documents. No nothing. Which tells me he was probably more important than they want to let us know.
Yeah, if he was one of the quote, have you ever heard the term originals?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, the first 38 agents of Donovan, he called them the quote originals.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
So, I mean, if he was that far back, the original OSS. Now, my
Yeah.
great uncle being British intelligence in 41, he was working for the BSC at Rockefeller Center. And then, of course, that moved on to create our own agency in June of 41 with Donovan and Roosevelt and so forth. So he was basically there. I mean, I say there, he was actually being tortured in a Japanese prison, but he was there and recalls about that transfer from the COI to the OSS, and then further when he got involved with the CIA in 47.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for your input on that. We
Mhm.
appreciate it. And do you have anything to add to that, Cory, at all? Or
Nope, I sure don't. Oh, here's something that interests me about that early era is that like between 45 when the OSS got dissolved and 47 when the CIA came into being, there were like a couple like intermediary agencies that were temporary transitional agencies to before establishing the CIA. I really am fascinated by what was going on between 45 and 47 because this is when Galen organization was operating. They operated until 56. And so I'm super interested. And that was initially handled by Army intelligence before it was handed over to CIA in what year was that? Like, it was late. It was like 49. It was handed over to CIA, which is weird because Dulles and Galen were friends. Yeah, that whole era is super fascinating to me. The Galen organization and all their influence, because Galen basically helped structure the CIA. So, and he's one of the more important people from the Nazi era that no one ever really talks about.
It was the Galen organization that first sent a signal in the spring March of 1941 called the Pi Circuit. And,
when he was the head of Foreign Armies East.
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, fascinating life that guy had. Kind of a weasel. Kind of turned on Hitler towards the end, and Hitler got rid of him. But and he was right though, because he was right. He said, "Don't go to Russia. Don't fight Russia." That's what he said. And Hitler was like, "Nope, we're going to Russia. Bye." And it was the biggest mistake Hitler made. That was the biggest mistake Hitler made in the war. Well, that not taking Britain first.
All right, man. We got a couple more minutes left. Do we have any more listener questions or anything like that in regards to Cory? But I want to plug his book real quick. He's writing a new one coming up, which he sent me a rough draft last night, which is I'm looking forward to actually sinking my teeth into. But his book is called A Warning from History, and it is an amazing, detailed piece of work. Cory, where can they pick that up specifically at?
On Amazon. That's the best place.
Okay, yeah. Warning from History by Cory Hughes. Yeah. Just in closing, just because of all the things that are happening lately, your movement specifically, Cory, is just super interesting because I feel like you're going to solve this thing like in a matter of like, I mean, you're on your way, but how how long do you think it will take? I mean, do you think it's going to need to help with AI or
No.
anything with future technology? I mean, how many more years do you think we have left of this to actually just get this thing out in the open and just expose it?
Oh, the only thing that I really want from AI is to be able to unredact documents. AI should be able to unredact documents. It should be able to tell the very fine differences in the black that we can't see and all that stuff, right? So that would be very cool. But so my first book it's basically I tried to identify the shooters. That was my whole thing, identifying the shooters, and of course that connects you to the upper apparatus. But with my Oswald stuff, I think what's really going to end up happening after I finish this book, I'm doing Oswald in Russia. Once I get into Oswald in Russia, I'll do Oswald from June 62 to the end. And that I'm going to have no choice. I'll have to do a day-to-day chronology. I'll have to know every day what he did. And there really isn't a very good one of those out there. I think I'm dreading getting to that actually, because I can tell that's going to be this first Oswald book and the next Oswald book in Russia. These flow pretty well because I kind of have a grasp on Oswald at this point. And Russia might throw me for a curve, but that final book that I do on Oswald himself will be really, I think, will wrap up all my works together. It'll wrap up with the dual Oswald stuff, the Kerry Thornley, William Seymour stuff, and it will. I'm going to try to find an answer why the hell he had that American bakery check stub when he got arrested. You know, why did he have stuff like that? What's that? What's going on with that? Did he actually have a $50 bill in his pocket when he got arrested? Because there's conflicting information over that, right? So yeah, there's a lot of very fine details that I don't plan on getting to until I get to that book, which will probably be a year from now. Because this book I'm writing right now, I knocked out like 200 plus pages in like 6 weeks. I couldn't believe it. I just got to about page 250, and I'm done with Oswald's life up till the Marines. And I'm really torn because I'm at page 250. I could put in another 40 or 50 appendix pages, have a 300-page book, but I feel like it's not a complete book. I got to do the Marine stuff with it, and that's going to make this thing like a 500-page book because the Marines is going to take me at least 200 pages plus an appendix.
Oh
So
yeah, and are you going to deep dive into like his associates that were in the Marines with him as well?
oh yeah,
Like the
oh yeah, I already know all the guys he was with in Santa Ana, the guys he was with in Natsugi and Formosa. Like I got statements from everybody that put him in 2 different places at once. Plus, on top of that, this is something that most people don't know about, and I have a feeling this is part of the whole thing with Oswald. There were 3 other Oswalds in the same circuit that he was in: Clyde, Clifford, and Clayton. 2 of them are brothers, 1 was not. But all 3 of those Oswalds were in Biloxi. They were in Memphis. Well, he didn't go to Memphis. Well, he might have gone to Memphis. We have some conflict here with the Memphis story. So, but we got these 3 other Oswalds in the same circuit during the same years. So then you get people popping up like what's his name? Donald. I forget his last name offhand. But he was one of Oswald's supervisors, and he came forward with a story about Oswald and said Oswald was like a private first class, and he did this, and he worked in the radio unit. But that doesn't match the description of our Oswald. Oswald was only a private first class very briefly because he got demoted because he was always in trouble, right? So we have these other Oswald stories that are put forth that I'm starting to think were probably these other Oswalds, Clyde, Clifford, or Clayton, who were in the same circuit that he was in at the same time, right? So I think that's pretty fascinating to me, and that's gonna be in there. There's man, his stuff with the Marines is crazy, especially when you get to him being in Atsugi and in Taiwan at the same time, or no, the Philippines. He was in the Philippines and he was in Atsugi at the same time because he was there getting treated for not only anal bleeding but for gonorrhea. So I don't know what he was doing over there to get anal bleeding and gonorrhea at the same time, but he did, and he was treated for a whole like 6 weeks or something. Actually, it was from late August through October, so I mean that's kind of nasty. But at the same time, I have the Marine diaries that show that he was over like in the Philippines, right? And this brings us to the Martin Strand story, and that gets crazy. Holy shit! If you haven't ever studied the Martin Strand story, Martin Strand got murdered in where was it? He was in Subic Bay in the Philippines. This is before Oswald goes to Corregidor. But yeah, that whole story with Martin Strand, that could, man, we don't have any documents. Like, there was a murder, basically. This guy got murdered, and there's about 25 pages of documents on that whole incident. Okay? There should be like 1,000. There should be 1,000 pages at least on a murder in the Marines at peacetime, right? So it's crazy. It got written off as a suicide or accidental death, actually. Accidental death, but none of the circumstances make any sense at all. The way he was shot, none of that stuff. And then Martin Strand's brother, who was in the Navy, who was also stationed with Martin Strand and Oswald at Subic Bay for a week. 4 months later, he falls off a boat. They don't find his body for a week. Just a not coincidence. They murdered those 2 guys. And I have a feeling it was over the dual Oswalds because the 2 Oswalds were both at the same time there's an overlap here in the Philippines at Corregidor, right? So I have a feeling that the Strand brothers, they probably bumped into both Oswalds and they both introduced themselves as Oswald, and that's why they took them out. So, and the funny thing is, Oswald was initially blamed for the shooting. Camarada, one of the guys in the Marines with him, basically started a rumor that Oswald was involved. And then when they went and asked him why, he's like, "Oh, I heard that from somebody else," but the rumor ended with him. The weird thing about that whole shooting is that Strand was on guard duty with somebody. They're always in pairs. The person he was on guard duty with has never been identified. And when the body was first found, that guy went and ran to get supervisors. He didn't say, "Hey, the sentry was shot." He said, "Hey, the sentry shot somebody." So that other person on duty with Martin Strand, never identified, not in the documents, don't know who he was. Was it Oswald? Probably not. He was probably in the mess hall. And if they were killing people to protect Oswald's identity, it wasn't Oswald killing anybody. So, it's a very complicated story. And I just wish we had more documents, but we don't. We got 25 pages, and that's it. So, but I think there's a precedent because you got the death of Ed Vabel. Ed Vabel died in 1971. He was 31 years old, and he died of a pulmonary embolism. He was healthy one day, dead the next, and his father told the HSCA he thought it was connected to the Oswald case. And because Ed Vabel, confirmed by a woman named Myra DeRusse LaRue, who knew Harvey Oswald in early 1954 at Beauregard, she personally linked Ed Vabel as Harvey's only friend. But then Lee goes to Beauregard the next semester, which to me is fucking crazy, psychotic on their part to even try to pull this off. And then Ed Vabell is friends with Lee. And then Ed Vabell ends up dead in 71. It's crazy stuff, right? And I'm convinced these people were all killed. But I'm paranoid. So yeah,
No, it's cool. And like I always say, I mean, I would call Oswald probably the most dysfunctional Forrest Gump there was. I mean, the guy is just, for his short life, I mean, good Lord, he went, I mean, whether, General Walker or even Kennedy or even back to his Marine days, I mean, the guy was just, he ended up being like the center of attention somehow in the wrong way, you know?
Intentionally. When you actually understand like his behavioral patterns and what was going on, it's all about the two Oswalds because they were both in the Marines at the same time, which is wild as shit.
Exactly.
Wild as shit. But yeah, that's all. That stuff, man. That's all going to have to be in this book that I'm writing now. If I get a book that's like 600 pages long, I'm going to have to split it in half. I'm not going to have a choice, and I'm really not wanting to do that.
Well, I find it interesting that you're actually going from the beginning all the way to the end. I think that's fascinating. I think anybody that wants to really find out the definitive, not just timeline for Oswald, I think that something that's chronicled like that is absolutely fascinating.
One thing that people are really going to have to come to grips with at some point in time, because nobody is coming to grips with this at all yet. The man who went to jail and was shot by Jack Ruby is not the man who was born Lee Harvey Oswald at all. Not even, I think they're brothers. I genuinely think they're brothers. And I think they're brothers because of a statement made to Dr. Milton Kurian when Oswald was allegedly at Youth House. And that brings up a whole slew of stuff I cover in my book. I think you have actually copies of the Youth House stuff right now in the rough draft I gave you.
Mm-hmm, yep.
That stuff is crazy. New York is wild. Like all the dates conflict. Oswald's in places he shouldn't be. He never showed up to go to the Trinity School. He's supposed to be there for like 3 weeks. The whole thing in New York is wild. But damn, I had a point and I forgot it. But yeah, this whole thing with Oswald and the dual Oswalds, people need to really come to grips with that. And I'm hoping that this Joannides stuff with the identity transfer stuff that was brought up, people will come to understand this. And then when you read my book, you'll be like, oh my God, because you'll see that there's major gaps in the record, like big, I call them potholes, right? And eventually you get more potholes than road. And what are you supposed to do with that? It's
I mean,
frustrating.
No, it's more than frustrating. And what you're looking at, I mean, again, a grooming program by the CIA, and also, again, like a doppelganger program that, may not be 100% doppelganger, but I mean, you have many cases that you have this going on. And it's just, I mean, the deeper you go, the more, dysfunctional you find.
Oh, I remember my point. So, John, what's his name? His name is Brennan. He refers over to the NYPD, and then they get John Caro. John Caro picks up Harvey Oswald. We know it's Harvey Oswald because he goes and talks to Milton Kurian. And what he tells Milton Kurian locked in for me that this dual Oswald was just a brother who was kept off the record. And then when you go back to Oswald's birth date and stuff, like there's all kinds of obfuscation there. And there's no birth certificate. All we have is a witness to live birth form. But what he told Dr. Kurian when he's in New York, and he told Dr. Kurian this on March 27th of 1953, but he's not supposed to be in custody for another 2 weeks, which is wild. He tells Dr. Kurian that he had trouble with school because when his family, they moved a lot, and when they got to a new area, his brother, knowing that Harvey wasn't going to go to school, his brother would go to school in his stead. Okay? That doesn't make any sense because Robert Oswald's 6 years older. There's no way a 16 or 17-year-old is going to a class of like an 11-year-old ever. Mm-hmm. John Pick's even older. So what brother is he talking about? And this accounts for the similarity, right? But the one thing that nobody can account for at all is where the hell did Oswald learn to speak Russian? Or did Oswald really ever learn to speak Russian? Because when he went to Russia, he never spoke Russian. The people who knew him there said he spoke English. But he spoke fluent Russian when he was at Santa Ana. He would get up on the mic in the Marines when they would do like these like variety shows, and he would get up there and he would read from Russian books. And it was like everyone said he was fluent, like he could speak perfectly. But then he gets to Russia, never speaks Russian? Nah, I got to figure that out. What's going on there? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, it's wild stuff. But and I found this in a document today. Actually, I'd known about this document for a while. It was from John Hart Ely, a memo about John Hart Ely, who was he was the guy tasked with Oswald's background for the Warren Commission, and he ran into the dual Oswald stuff all the time. And so then I got this letter to J. Lee Rankin from Albert Jenner. And in that letter, he praises John Hart Ely for like 5 paragraphs. And then the last paragraph, he says, despite his good work, we're going to have to materially omit some of his stuff or change some of the material that he provided to us because his speculation didn't bore out. What he's saying is we got to alter these documents because it tells too much of the truth. So what does that tell me? It tells me that Rankin and Jenner, they knew about the dual Oswald stuff, and they knew they had to cover it up, right? And so when you actually go through the testimony and you really understand there's 2 Oswalds, and you look at the questions that they're asking, they ask people questions to determine if they knew the 2 Oswalds, right? Like whether Oswald was right or left-handed, because there's some conflicting stuff there. Whether Oswald had scars, right? And they're asking these questions subtly, just stuck in with other things, right? So as to not maybe tip people off as to what they're looking for. But once you understand the John Hart Ely stuff and how he found out a lot of stuff that the Warren Commission ended up having to scrap, it's like, duh, they all knew. They all knew. And then when Robert Oswald's talking about specifically 1954, in 1953, he goes to Opelika, which is a CIA Air Force base. Okay, down in Miami. It's a small CIA base. It's where they ran the Arbenz operations, and it's where Mongoose got launched out of. He's there in 53. He gets out in January 54. January 54, he tells the Warren Commission he goes to New Orleans, and he stays with his brother and his mother, but they never press him on what address he stayed at. And the reason for that was because he stayed with the false Marguerite and Harvey Oswald at 126 Exchange Place. We know this because that's his original statement to the FBI, but he didn't say that to the Warren Commission. But guess what? Marguerite and Lee don't move in there allegedly until June of 55. That's the official story. But then I got letters from Marguerite to John Pick, who's not in on this at all. John Pick is not in on this scheme. And that's obvious through his Warren Commission testimony, where he outs the fact that, like, the picture at the Bronx Zoo, not his brother. The guy he met on Thanksgiving 62, not his brother. So yeah, like, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, man. This is the stuff that gets me up in the morning. Like, this is the ultimate spy story. It's got everything. It's got murder and body doubles and everything you want in a spy story. That's why I love this Oswald stuff way more than the assassination stuff. Way more, because it connects to other things that eventually, hopefully, we'll know what they are and have a better grasp on what the intelligence community was doing back then, before there was a CIA.
Yeah, it's just interesting. It's a rabbit hole that just, I mean, you can go as deep as one could possibly go, man. It's just absolutely, it's insane. But, well, Cory, I'm going to go ahead and close out tonight, but I just wanted to thank you again for your time, and Charles and Lioness and Chop Liver. I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight. A new listener tonight looks like Save. Thank you for listening to us as well. Tim, who chimed in earlier, and Cory, if you have any last words, feel free to share it, and we're going to go ahead and close out.
Nope. Just if you really want to understand my perspective on everything, pick up my book. I identified all the shooters. I haven't found any evidence of any additional ones. But right now, I'm kind of conflicted over whether the headshot came from the Knoll or the tunnel. It was one of the two. I'm kind of starting to lean towards the tunnel, which would make David Ferrie the only shooter on the Knoll. So that I'm still researching. I don't know if I'll ever come to an answer on that one. But I got to get back to Dealey Plaza. I've only been there once. But yeah, pick up my book, A Warning from History. It's got everything in it.
Yep, on Amazon. And again, I am Tim Gardner, and you guys have a wonderful night. Cory, again, thanks for your time. I'll chat with you here a little bit later. Thank you. Good night.